Question 3, Don says, thank you. The foundation of our present illusion we have stated previously to be the concept of polarity. I would ask that, since we have defined the two polarities as service to others and service to self, is there a more complete or eloquent or enlightening definition, or any more information that we don't have at this time on the two ends of the poles that would give us the better insight into the nature of polarity itself? So here we go, the nature of polarity. Ross says, it is unlikely that there is a more pithy or eloquent description of the polarities of their density than service to others and service to self, due to the nature of the mind-body-spirit complex's distortions towards perceiving concepts relating to philosophy in terms of ethics or activity. However, we might consider the polarities using slightly variant terms. In this way, a possible enrichment of insight might be achieved for some. So, first, apologies for those who read the slideshow that I have, which has the same quotes within quotes, should be single quotes there. My friend and critic of grammar would have pointed that out in Spanish because he is that keen of an observant. But yeah, I missed that. In any case, we're talking about here first establishing what polarity is in terms of service to self and service to others. We know that polarity is usually seen as positive and negative, and this is fine. I think the word is cathode and anode. I may be wrong in the second one. Anode, is it? I don't want to look it up. But then again, we're talking about polarity. But in terms of service to others and service to self, is there a more descriptive term? Is Don asking. And so Ross says that it's unlikely that such a description exists, or that they can think, I guess. I could actually put this more into perspective by saying that prior to the veil, there was no service to self, right? And there was only service to the one, I would say, right? And so there was nobody else to serve but the one, through different methods, of course, but it wasn't very intense. And so after the veil, the service became very intense, but it also gave birth to the service to self polarity, which wasn't really intended, as far as I understand, even though it was possible, but it wasn't the intention of the veil. So that's a new concept. It's novel. Now, they say the nature of the mind-body-spirit complex's distortion towards perceiving concepts relating to philosophy in terms of ethics or activity. This is important because we shouldn't confuse service to self and service to others, or the positive and negative path, with any other polarity. For example, when we talk about moral polarity, which is good and evil, correct and incorrect, these are moral polarities that we establish as, let's say, humans or culturally and so on. That's why it varies so much. And why we may agree that, I don't know, women can vote. It's a kind of moral polarity. And so we go beyond that and we say, oh, you know what, this is, and I think this is still present in some cultures where women don't have the right to vote. I may be wrong, or maybe it was finally abolished at some point during this past decade or past 2 decades. There's so many polarities that exist in our reality, but when we talk about service to self and service to others, although it kind of resembles moral polarity a little bit, it's not. It's ethical. It's how you behave in terms of the creation. What is your attitude towards creation? And I like to see this as, did you see yourself and act as a separate individual, or as the one, as how this knowledge of yourself as unity informs your behavior, you see. And that's basically what the positive path is. It's to allow this knowledge of you, the real you, being the one creator, to inform your reality. That's it. It's very simple. This is not complicated. We go into complex definitions as metaphysical and spiritual evolutions and so on, only because we like to do that. But in the most foundational sense, when we talk about service to others, we're just talking about allowing that which is through us to be what it wants to be. And that is the biggest service. Why? You're serving the one. And by serving the one, you're not serving yourself. That's a key distinction here, because one might say, well, if you're serving yourself, then you're serving the one self, which is true, because there is no other service but service to the one. But you're thinking that that's the misconception, that you are a limited being, that you are a fragment of reality that needs to control the universe, basically. And I've talked about how this shows up not only in human form as you begin to control bigger and bigger populations. We can see this with monarchies and governments, or empires and republics and so on. All of this creates the idea, the illusion of power over others. And then when we transcend the service to self polarity, and we go into fourth and fifth and sixth density negative, we sort of enhance this power over others, and this gets very complicated in terms of metaphysics and so on. But that's what happens until eventually that expansion of power reaches a limit of, I cannot control anything anymore, everything is just this one being, and I am that one being, so my polarity dissolves and everything's fine. But yeah, the service to self is that avenue, if you will. And then on the positive one, it's just recognizing that no, there is nothing I need to control. Everything is being fed to me by this all-being intelligence that wants to manifest in a specific way. And so that manifestation is what I call me. You see, it's that ripple in the ocean that recognizes, oh, I'm not independent from the ocean, I'm just the activity of the ocean, might as well go with the flow. And so that to me is the definition of service to self, service to others, negative path, positive path in terms of ethics, because it's a matter of how do you behave, what is your behavior, your attitude towards the creation and others. Of course, when you talk about the creation, you include everything. And that behavior dictates your polarity spiritually. And so they say that they're going to explain polarities in a different way. In this way, it will enrich the understanding of this. Ra says, one might consider the polarities with the literal nature enjoyed by the physical polarity of the magnet, the negative and positive, with their electrical characteristics, may be seen to be just as in the physical sense. It is to be noted in this context that it is quite impossible to judge the polarity of an act or an entity, just as it is impossible to judge the relative goodness of the negative and positive poles of the magnet. Another method of viewing polarities might involve the concept of radiation absorption. That which is positive is radiant, that which is negative is absorbent. So that's another way of looking. You see, we are very fast to attribute evil to the negative polarity. And I would caution against that, because that is creating a sort of polarized self, you know. And I'm not talking about spiritual or ethical polarized being, but a morally polarized being. That can become an obstacle. I'm not saying, of course, that there is evil in good actions that kind of expose evil, right? That's happening in our world. It's a very subtle distinction that we have to make here. We're talking about the transcendent being. We're not talking about what could be better for the planet. That's a sort of third density work, third chakra activation. You know, how do we order society in a way that is better with the world? And that's fine. You know, I have nothing against that, and I'm very careful not to sound that way, because this is where it gets very tricky. And so in Chinese philosophy, we can see the discussion between the supposed discussion between Lao Tzu and Confucius, Confucius has this moral behavior. It's a beautiful philosophy, you know, morality, and how people conduct themselves, just like Plato had a sort of morality towards society. And yet comes Lao Tzu, you know, a transcendent being, or at least a representation of it, and mocks Confucius to say, no, your virtue is not virtue at all, because it is polarized. You see, it is saying that this is the right way to do things, this is the good way, and by that you're creating evil, because you have to create a sort of side. So this is the kind of distinction that I'm making here, that it's important to keep in mind, because again, you cannot see the service to self as evil. Yes, within the structure of our third density human society, it is almost synonymous with evil because of the things that they do. But in the grand scheme of things, right, in the transcendent view of reality, that's where we need to make the distinction and say, from a certain point of view that is much more elevated in terms of perspective, of view, cosmological view, it is fine. It is neither good nor bad. It is as it is, period. Okay, so that is why Ross says, they give the example of the magnet. You know, there's a positive charge, a negative charge, and it's causing work. Without the positive or the negative, none of them could do any work. And so because the two are present, then we have work. And in this context, they say, it is quite impossible to judge the polarity of an act or an entity, just as it is impossible to judge the relative goodness of the negative and positive poles of the magnet. Very simple, very simple. This is a view, and it does brings a sort of peace. You see a liberation in your mind. I know you can sense this, because it's something that just stands out as we understand that there is no way to be polarized morally that would not create another side, you see. So again, it's a very, very important distinction, and we all need to go through this process. There is no other way. We all need to go through this process. We've all seen good and evil. I would even dare to say at this point that suggest actually that you consider that good and evil is an individual thing. It is not a collective one. When it becomes collective, it can become very toxic. I think good and evil must be something that is individual. We all have our own view on it, and that's it. If it so happens that it matches other people, then we are in resonance and we act in a communal way. But I don't depend on other people to validate the goodness of what I think it is or what it's not. I don't need that. That's just my own view. And it's always challenged. it is always challenged, because there is not one good thing that we used to do 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, that is right now considered the same. It's always been relative, let's say. Whereas the view that everything is always in balance, everything is perfect always, has been a view that is correct. That is the correct view. But I'm talking about morality, what we think is good and bad. There's always been something that changes that. Very important to keep that in mind.